You live around a monument, touched by the magnificence, the elegance of the honesty, and expect eternity. The monument isn't eternal, and now we weep over the sand and pebbles which remain. The hills have their way. Rock slides break off into roads and make them impassable. The roadbed, gouged with the sharp edges of cleaved rock and snapped branches, waver with the sloth of old carpet, showing an age that is at once timeless and momentary. Yesterday's season is history in the weeds, revealed when the snow melts. There are faded pop cans and fast food wrappers, the endless corpses of lost family pets and mangled deer. Their exposed ribs are the jails for the flies, until they are forgiven for their hunger and maggots, and sent to fresh carrion down the road from the next winter thaw. There are memories of war with these roads. The lumbering combines at harvest have the slothful tyranny of bovine. Bulldozers clear seasonal slides and washouts, making their own damage, dots and dashes cut into the hard-packed back roads from the heavy steel treads. The roads become the strong back that holds the rural landscape upright. Potholes and ruts become the road's revenge against passing vehicles that show no gratitude. This was a boon for repair shops. As the potholes grow, washboards become epidemic. Trucks and cars lashed against these deformations in the road. The machines have no choice but to break down. Created from civilization for civilization, roads fulfill a need to pass from village to village. Ribbons of sand and stone make men brothers and allow them to travel from war to war as enemies, in commerce and trade, and in antipathy to their vices. Keeping humanity as a whole rather than as units of anarchy, roads remain as city-states and empires collapse, sometimes being the only evidence of a civilization having existed at all. For this, roads outlive even history, as being a pathway between the future and the past. Civilizations fall, the last thing to fade as temples burn and gods grow weary and pass on, are the roads, the strings which tied tribes and factions of humanity together. Modern indemnity causes disenfranchisement with the past, even as roads outlast rivers and streams, cities and shores. Created by seasonal runoff and passage of heavy equipment, with rains and mudslides, the ruts and potholes make backroads endlessly wrecked. Construction crews and equipment, draining budgets better intended for other projects, have little else to show for their diligence. It is proof that keeping roads in good condition was the most costly franchise of all the activities of civilization, and the most important for its historical relevance, an obsession matched only by a dog chasing its own tail. An outcropping of rock looked over a pale-lit and shallow valley. From south, the rocks and cliffs rose up and northward, a chin and jutting jaw of the last Titan to have walked the earth, perhaps a Norse god, or something more ancient, primeval, born from the same celestial tempest the sun and moon and surrounding planets were born from. The remains of the teeth of this earthen jawbone were the blackened and broken stumps of old oak and pine trees. Where the palate and tongue would be, tucked out of sight, were the shambles of branches, nettles, snapped underbrush, and pockets of old garbage under layers of dead leaves. These were the bones of this giant's last supper, before the beast was lain to rest. This was the far eastern side of the state of Iowa, where fractured hills and rolling mounds bring forth the idea that many such ethereal giants were buried just under the shoots of seasonal corn and soybeans. Under the shoulder of this giant, buried under the soil and stone, were the walls of a cabin, of wrought timbers and cut planks, fashioned by hand and placed on purpose. The cabin had stood for generations, placed in just the right spot where the elements and the sky would have little to say about it outlasting so many seasons. Old men say only things handmade last the test of time. This is true, as such labor was from the hands of craftsmen, or indentured artisans in fear for their lives, under the beck and call of kings or the bitterness of the aristocracy. It was around this cabin, tucked back in the trees, where the dead of winter could still be felt in the cool shadows cast opposite the summer sun. A ghost presided over this ruin. Once both a craftsman and then a servant, he appreciated the eternity. The floorboards had shrunk little, sounding solid like melon. The walls and washboards were blackened at the edges and bleached along their breadth. The ceiling showed gaps where planks had shrank from alternating sun and frost. The windows were gaping and frameless, still quite square. The only modern fixture to the cabin was a thin screen door, where it had withered and deteriorated to a testament of the cabin's lasting resilience. Machines have no craft, as the store-bought door was a simple shred of corrosion and rotted foam filler, hung in the frame like dead animal skin. Havre Sellers hadn't been in this valley for centuries, even as a ghost, if the hours of a man's life stretched as days for years. Solitary confinement, steel bars and brick walls, a daily fear of one's life and sanity, brought a man to feel the minutes slip by like seasons. Longing, loss, and exhaustion caused him to collapse as he stepped into the old cabin. He knelt on the floor, feeling the texture of the wood grain press into his knees through the worn denim. A cold sense of pain, no longer a capacity his body could feel. He knelt as if someone were to take his head off, and he bowed his head, resigned, waiting for the hot wire sensation, that sharp pulse of electricity through his skin, as nerves were suddenly cut, and then the drifting darkness. No, there was no executioner. Only the days before him. He was now a free man, ghost or otherwise. These walls, this floor, the roof over his head. Havre ran his fingers across the wood grain, feeling the deep worn cuts, like the skin of a man who worked all his life, fingerprints of a lone struggle. He had played here as a boy. Alone he was a king of his own kingdom. It was in his imagination where these rocks, this corner of the valley, was the remains of a beastly monster. He overlooked the valley from the chin of the monster he had slain with his own hands, looking down on the low lands as a proper king would, the small houses and fine-lined lanes lain under well-trimmed and cultured trees. He carved into the walls and floor. He stole toys from other boys, what a proper king would call taxes, and held them there, in the cabin. Those four walls had been there long before Havre was born, and would remain long after he was done and dust. The cabin had become his haven and his guilt, his desire to lord over the fates of people he thought lower than himself, and a place to hide out when he was running from the cops as a young man. Theft was a hard habit to break. Even the years behind bars had tried their best and only left him hungry and with deeper scars. Havre Sellers took a long breath. The place had hardly changed. He could have died and been reborn 100 times and returned to this place as a ghost before his rebirth and again as a reborn man. The walls and floors never changed, all eternal. It was a shame children's dreams don't last as long, dreams recycled through their eyes as the poverty they witnessed of others. Heroes bleed and die. This cabin would still remain. Above the front door was a carving he remembered from his childhood, an inspiration to his imagination, though the words carved were decades older than he. Now he knew what the carving meant. Now, the letters spelled anguish rather than inspiration. Reality placed such burden on dreams. A man was best bleached of his dreams and be free of the expectations. Dreams were the devil, taunting and tempting. Dreams were damnation, sending willful souls into the world of monsters, armed only with dreams to defend themselves. Born to dream, one grows into magnificence in their dreams, then into outrage. No one ever explained the catastrophic price paid to living one's dreams. It was why so many put their dreams away when they grew up. Life is too short to live with such anguish.